Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Azure Cloud Native Spotlight session. This one's going to be super awesome. It's all about KEDA. But first, let's have a look at our code of conduct. So in today's session, we ask everyone to be aware of others, be friendly and patient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and most importantly, be kind and considerate of others. And with that, let me bring in our guest today, Tom. Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for taking the time out to come and talk to us about KEDA. I'm super excited to see it. So with that, I'll chuck your screen up on and I will leave you to it.
Thank you very much. So, like the introduction said, I am here to talk about Kubernetes event-driven autoscaling, or short KEDA. And what we try to do is make application autoscaling on Kubernetes that simple. So that's what we try to achieve. My name is Tom Kerkhove, and I'm one of the 5 maintainers of KEDA. So I'm not doing all of this alone. And if you're interested, I also maintain some other open source projects. So if we have a look at vanilla Kubernetes without KEDA, so what is the situation? Imagine you have these 4 deployments and you want to auto-scale them based on Prometheus, Azure Monitor metrics, AWS, Kafka, or CPU and memory. You have to do a couple of things. First of all, you need to create what's called a horizontal pod autoscaler, which allows you to, hence the name, scale out horizontally and scale back in. There's also a vertical pod autoscaler for the vertical scaling if you want, but that's out of scope for now. So the HPA is baked into Kubernetes and allows you to just say, take this deployment and I want to scale it. Now, the problem is out of the box that only supports CPU and memory. So because of that, Kubernetes introduced the concept of Kubernetes external metrics, meaning you can bring your own metrics in Kubernetes on which you can auto-scale. But in order to achieve this, you need to use these what's called a metric adapter or a metric server to basically get that information from the external system. Now, there is a problem there, though. You can only use one of them. So you have to standardize on one and basically bring all that information into one place. So, for example, you can use Promitor, which is another open source project that I maintain, to get all the Azure Monitor metrics in Prometheus, use the Prometheus metrics adapter for Prometheus metrics and other metrics, and then you can auto-scale based on that. But clearly, this is not a trivial thing to do. And that's what KEDA tries to solve here. We want you to automatically scale your deployments, jobs, practically anything. You can even create your own custom resources and implement /scale sub resource, and we can scale them for you as well. Where the idea is that you can use one or more scalars from our catalog, and you just define when you want to scale and how much you want to scale. And that catalog has grown actually to more than 50 scalars. If we don't have what you need, you can also build your own through our external scaler, external push, or metrics adapter scaler. So we're also extensible. One of the key selling points is that we allow you to scale to 0 or even pause your auto scaling. So that it's not just the scaling, but we're adding more value around that as well. Security is important, so we allow you to pull authentication information from the Kubernetes paradigm, such as Kubernetes secret or config map. Don't put secrets there, but people do that. But also from other things, such as Azure Key Vault, HashiCorp, or basically use no secret approach. It runs on Linux and ARM, which is another major change that we recently did, and it is a CNCF incubation project. And our focus is really to make sure that you can focus on scaling your application and not managing all of that infrastructure. So if you come back here, and start with a clean sheet, what it will look like is we can basically replace this whole auto-scaling infrastructure with just deploying KEDA. And KEDA has that metric adapter that we were mentioning earlier. And instead of only supporting one system, KEDA knows how to integrate with all of these various systems by using the scalars that I mentioned. So instead of creating an HBA, you can create what's called a scaled object. And you can see a scaled object as your auto-scaling rules for your single application. Why is that important? If you want to scale based on multiple systems, everything will be consolidated in that one scaled object. And then what Kubernetes does, what KEDA does is it uses the scale controller because KEDA handles 0 to 1 and 1 to 0 scaling. But for the rest, it basically just feeds the metrics to the HBA with that metric adapter that we were mentioning earlier. So more in detail, basically Kubernetes will be pulling KEDA for metrics through the adapter. And then we have an operator next to it to make sure that if you create these resources, that we automatically start pulling the systems for information, that we create the horizontal pod autoscaler and whatnot. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're actually rather extending Kubernetes and building on top of it, which is very important for us. You can easily install it by using Helm or Operator Hub, and then use the out-of-the-box Scalars or the external Scalars, which I will come back to later on as well. So in terms of the production-grade authentication that I was mentioning, is basically we want to tackle multiple things. Is one, we want to allow you to reuse authentication information across multiple applications. And also we want to make sure that you're not duplicating all these secrets. You can either do that inside a namespace, or you can have a cluster operator that basically configures, for example, managed identity, and make sure that the different teams can use them by using the cluster trigger authentication. So there's a lot of options there depending on your needs. And yeah, you can see the list of current integrations that we support. We have 9 of them. And for Azure specific, we have Azure Key Vault, we have Azure AD Pod Identity, and we also support the new Azure AD Workload Identity. So you can just deploy KEDA and get started with these. Here are the main scalars that we have today. Some of them are through an add-on, but yeah, we have more than 50 of them. And on the website, you can now also search and see if what you need is there. If what you need is not there, you can let us know, and we can add it to the backlog, or you can even contribute them. We are more than happy to review those. Now, that's a lot of talking, so let me just show you a demo of how that works in action. And you can actually try this yourself if you go to this GitHub repo. It is basically a sample on how to use a .NET Core, well, a .NET 6 worker that scales based on a service bus queue. So what we'll be doing is I already have a order portal and an order processor deployed in my cluster. One shows the amount of messages on the queue, just to make it visual. And then the other one will process all the messages in the queue. But because it's doing things, it takes time to process them. So eventually that one instance will not be able to keep up because we'll generate a lot of messages, and then we will deploy KEDA, and you'll see that it instantly starts scaling things out. So I will switch to Firefox first. So this is the sample that I was mentioning. I will use connection string authentication just for the sake of time, but you can also use these 2 other managed identity scenarios, and they are written in a tutorial way so that it is easy for you to basically follow them if you're new. So going back to my command line here, I already have one pod running, and I will show you everything in the namespace. So I have one running, which I'm watching at the moment. You can see the processor. We have a web app, and yeah, the deployments that are hosting them. And what we will do in a second is we'll start generating a lot of messages. We can go to, let's say, 300 and see how it reacts. Now, before we do that, I'd like to show the Service Bus namespace. Why is that? Well, because security matters, and you should think about the permissions you grant. So, for example, the worker that's running only has listen permissions, because in the end, that's only what it needs. The generator only needs to be able to send messages, and the portal and the autoscaler, in this case KEDA, need managed permissions, because that's what's required to get the current message count. So why is this important? The order processor that is deployed is just a simple deployment that is running our image. That is not according to best practices, because there's no CPU memory limits, but hey, it's a demo. And all it has is basically the connection string, which comes from the secret, the name of the queue, and yeah, for sake of the demo, we have to specify that we want to use connection string authentication. So here's the base64 encoded connection string, and that's the application, okay? So let's just queue 350 orders, which we'll start seeing here. And then you can see slowly this one is starting to pick up those messages. So if we go to the portal, you can see this is increasing, and this is increasing, and then eventually it will go down very slowly, really very slowly. See, that's the top, and it's going down slowly. This is not what I like. I like to have auto-scaling solutions. So what we will do is we will, actually, I should show you that KEDA is already installed. I just did an Helm install. And you can see it's deployed here. And I'm actually running the older version, 2.7. We're at 2.8. But all I did was Helm install KEDA, and that was it. It's that simple. Okay. So what we'll do now is we'll deploy one of those scaled objects, and we will define how we want to auto-scale our application. Let me close this first. So what I have here is another secret with managed permissions and another base64 encoded connection string. So this is the connection string with managed permissions for the autoscaler ACL that I added. So why is that important? Because it needs managed permissions. KEDA allows you to reuse the connection string on the workload, but that would mean that my application also gets managed permissions, which is not really nice from a security perspective. So that's why we will use our trigger authentication feature and basically say for the scaled object that I have, I will need to have a connection parameter. And for this, I want KEDA to look at my secret in Kubernetes, which has this name and this queue. So basically, we're taking the base64 encoded connection string, and that's what KEDA will use to pull the metrics. So once we have that, we can create the scaled object. So the scaled object is really your auto-scaling rules. It starts with defining your scale target. What do I want to auto-scale? In this case, is the order processor deployment. By default, it assumes it's a deployment. You can specify API version and type, etc. You can basically point to anything. And then I'm basically saying I want to have at least 0 replicas and a maximum of 50. And then KEDA will handle all of the rest. Here I'm explicitly defining the cooldown period, which basically is used for the scale in for the sake of the demo, so that it's pretty aggressive. And then I define when it needs to scale. And this is where the triggers come in. where I say I want to scale based on the Azure Service Bus queue, which has the name orders, and I want you to scale when I have 50 messages. For authentication, I could refer to the connection string on the workload, but in this case, we can reuse this connection string. Imagine I have two workloads processing different queues. I could use this, if I have a better name, I could reuse this connection string because it's scoped on the namespace, and I have only one connection string for auto-scaling both of them. So this is where you can reuse these authentication things. Now, I've been talking a lot, so I need to hurry so that there are still messages on the queue. Let me see. Okay, we're good to go. So I will now deploy these two things, or three things, and you will see create trigger authentication and the scaled object. And I forgot to do get pods, and I will watch them as well. So you see now I have one instance, and you can see it is spinning up new ones. Wait, I need to watch the deployment. Sorry, that was confusing. So watch the deployment. We can see we're already scaling to 4. Now we're going to 5. And while that is loading, you can also get the details of your trigger authentication in the CLI. Now it's a bit big because I zoomed in. But yeah, you can basically see if it's using pod identity, secret environment variable, HashiCorp fault, etc. And you can also check all the active auto-scaling rules that you have. So for example, here, let me just move this for a sec. So you can see this is my scaled object. This is what I'm scaling. This is the min, the max, the triggers that I'm using, and if it's actively scaling, etc., etc. So this is really useful for operators as well. Now, as you can see, it starts to scale out, and then you can see now it's starting to scale, process the messages faster. I would actually expect it to scale in a sec more. So I guess that's going to kick in soon. It's probably, yeah, it's because it's already processing enough. So let me actually, no, I won't do it for the sake of time, but yeah, now it's going to basically drain the complete queue. Then it's going to wait a bit. Now you'll see, poof, it instantly scales to 0. So I will move the window here. Just to show you that if I, let me close this window. Yeah, if I just trigger this order generator again and just say 50, you'll also see how quickly this one will kick in. So it's really reactive to your landscape, and it will almost instantly notice that things are in the queue, and it will start scaling out. Now, at the moment, it's not instantly, but you can configure all of these things because what we've seen here is like, you could consider this as the bare minimum, but you have control over everything. So now it's basically going to go to 4 and basically process all of these. Okay, before I move on, are there any questions at the moment? No. Okay, perfect. Then I will move on. So Azure also loves KEDA. And actually, that's one of the main reasons that KEDA started is you were able to start running more of these Azure PaaS services outside of Azure, where it started with functions, which you could deploy on Kubernetes. Nowadays, you can do it with logic apps, API management, etc. But if you self-host these on Kubernetes, it was missing this serverless scaling capability. That's why KEDA was started to basically give you that same experience on Kubernetes. And so if we have a look at the history, It was first committed on February 2019, so almost 4 years ago. And then it was open sourced in May by the Azure Functions team in a collaboration with Red Hat. We shipped the first version at Ignite, and then it joined the CNCF on March 2020 as a sandbox project. And then later that year, we shipped the version 2, which primarily had the additional trigger authentication and all of that more, let's say, advanced things around it. And that's when we saw more of the bigger end users kick in, such as Alibaba Cloud that standardized on KEDA. And we had a lot more. And I think by August, when we opened the proposal for incubation, we had around 11 published end users. Then we had Azure Container Apps, which was a very big win for Azure, which basically is built on top of open source technologies, including KEDA. So if you use Azure Container Apps, you're basically using KEDA under the hood. And then last summer, we had managed offerings of KEDA. So if you are using AKS, for example, you can now use the KEDA add-on, which is in public preview, that deploys KEDA in your cluster. You don't even have to deploy it yourself anymore. And once it goes GA, you'll even get Azure support with it. And then yesterday, we were excited to open the proposal for KEDA to graduate to CNCF graduated project. So this is not final yet. We're hoping to get accepted, but this is the next step for KEDA. Now, I talked about Azure Functions. You can basically take the Azure Functions core CLI today and deploy your existing function to Kubernetes and scale it with KEDA without even knowing what KEDA is. Let me see. I have time, but I have not prepared this. But what the heck? So let's just have a look at that in action. And that should be big enough. So if I just go here, oops, no. And for the sake of the demo, I don't know this from the top of my head, but I will copy paste them. So if you do a new and then create a Azure function with, for example, the service bus queue trigger, it's going to scaffold me a project. Once I have that, I can just configure it. Okay, I can now go to my function. Yes, I trust this folder. So this is my Azure function. It needs to use the order queue, and it needs to use, so I just need to stitch this up and say, hey, this is my, and I need to take the connection string. So I will create a new identity because you should always split them. Here we go. So let me take that one here. So I added this, and actually I think that's it. So now I will just add a Docker file to it so that I don't even have to know how to do that. So everything's fine. It's added. And now the interesting piece is if I do a func deploy, and I don't want to run this because it's going to, so what func Kubernetes deploy does actually is it will take the current repo. It will automatically build the Docker file that was added. It's going to push it to the registry that I'm defining here. So in this case, this is the GitHub container registry. It's going to push that image. It's going to scaffold a Kubernetes manifest, and it will deploy that manifest to my current cluster. So if I run this, you'll see the manifest that it will deploy. So just give it a sec. It shouldn't be that long. Okay, here we go. So this is what it generated. So it basically created a secret, which includes my connection string. It created a deployment. That deployment has my my container image. So this was the registry I specified and the name of my function with the latest tag. It's pulling in the configuration. It's adding readiness and startup probe. And here you see it automatically added the scaled object. And this is, this is the bare minimum that you have to add. So it's basically the scale target with triggers here. So it's basically saying use the orders queue. And in this case, it's reading the connection string from the environment variable. So in this case, if I would deploy it, it will not work because I only granted listen permissions. But yeah, if you want to do this, this is definitely possible. But as you can see, you don't have to know anything about KEDA. Everything is baked in and ready to go for you. Okay, going back to the slides. So this is how easy it is to take an existing Azure function and retarget it to Kubernetes and deploy it with autoscaling baked in. So in summary, these are the three things where you will be using KEDA if you deploy to one of these. So Azure Container Apps is built on KEDA. So if you autoscale there, it's using KEDA under the hood. If you use Azure Application Services for Arc, which is in preview, it also relies on KEDA to autoscale all of these. And then we have the new AKS add-on, which is more of a managed offering for KEDA if you want to simplify things, worry less about your infrastructure, and get support. Now, what we can do is we can take that same demo that we did earlier, and we can deploy that same container to container apps and basically benefit from KEDA as a service, as a figure of speech. So let's have a look. So I will close this one. Bye-bye. So first I need to change the connection string here, which is of course hard-coded because, hey, demos. Okay. And let's remove this one. So now it's going to target the new queue. And yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention this. If you want to do this yourself, you can also follow this on this GitHub repo. But I already deployed these container apps so that we don't have to wait. For starters here, I have the portal, which is available here. So nothing on the queue. And then I have another application on the same environment here. My processor. And this is the same container. It does not have an ingress because it's just a worker. And if you go and have a look at the scaling section, this is where it gets interesting. So it has 0 to 10 maximum replicas. I have one autoscale rule, which says type custom, because some of them are baked in, but if they're not supported, you can use custom. And basically, okay, it's not shown in this UI here. So let me go here. Oops. Basically, what I can do is if I specify the custom rule type here, this is basically the name of the Kubernetes of the KEDA trigger, so the trigger type. And then for authentication, I can specify these references, which is a container app secret. And then this basically maps to a KEDA authentication parameter. So under the hood, this is using the trigger authentication. And then here, I just have to specify the rest of the trigger metadata. So all of this is basically the scaled object and the trigger authentication, which is being defined, and they do that for me. So if I go to the metrics here, you can also see what the instance count is. And you can see I did a quick test earlier. So show me the last 30 minutes. And what I'll do is I'll just do the same thing. I want to let's go with 250. And it's going to start ramping these things up. There's a delay in the Azure Monitor metrics, which can take up to 5 minutes, but eventually we'll see also that our container apps our container apps app has scaled out, if all goes well. Okay, yeah, so you see it probably now has one instance, and container apps will soon start scaling out. So you see it already eats the queue faster than it initially did. So if we go here and wait a little bit longer, it will start showing these. You can even split them by revision. I only have one, but if you're doing new deployments, you can see that as well. So this is a very good addition. And they also have other metrics like Replica Restart is another recent addition that's super, super useful to troubleshoot things. Oops. Okay, so you see now it starts to pick up. Wait, where did it go? Okay, so now it's at 4 replicas. And then, yeah, it's basically going to go through the whole queue. A bit at the same rate as in my demo earlier. And yeah, basically, there's not much to see here, but just wanted to show that you can do the same thing with less effort. And you can define these auto-scaling rules in ARM or Bicep if you want. And the queue is empty, and yeah, that's it. So how's the community and the adoption? So KEDA today has 5.4 stars on GitHub with a lot of contributors, and we do bi-weekly community stand-up. So we did one this week, so the next one is in 2 weeks. And you can find more information on our website. And then here you can see all our current listed end users. So if you are using KEDA, feel free to reach out, and we're more than happy to list you. In terms of the scalars, which is one of the main added values for KEDA, we're constantly adding more of them. We're waiting for the community to also bring up the ones that are missing, and you can see that we try to add at least one every release. So yeah, that's really important for us. If you want to know how Alibaba Cloud uses KEDA, you can read it on that website. We also have reference cases from Zapier, from Cast AI, and others if you're interested. Then I also mentioned that there are these external scalars. So imagine something's not baked into KEDA, but you want to scale based on them. For example, one that we have is the Azure Cosmos DB change speed scalar. Because, for example, that one did not have a Go SDK, but a .NET one, we decided to build an external scalar. But it's not part of the core. So we basically work with the Artifact Hub team so that now there is a KEDA scalar kind. and everybody can publish their external scalars on Artifact Hub, so that we are building an ecosystem around all of them. So you can go there, you can search for them, and actually nowadays, if you go to KEDA.sh to the scalars, you can also search for external scalars directly from our website, which are basically coming through Artifact Hub as well. So we really want you to find the scalars that you need, either if they are built-in or external. So what's coming? We have a lot of ideas. We are evaluating a lot of things, but again, we are very flexible and we're listening to the community. So we always want to introduce new scalars and secret sources. Here are just some ideas, but feel free to let us know what you want to see as well. Then a big one that's coming up is cloud events. So we as KEDA want to start emitting cloud events so that you can extend KEDA. So imagine you want to get notified when your application is scaling to 0 or from 0, or somebody deleted an auto-scaling rule. You will be able to just subscribe to these events and then react to them, which will be super powerful. Another thing we want to do is make our HTTP add-on GA, which is now in beta. And we want to deploy multiple KEDA installations in one cluster, which is not supported. There are valid reasons why you would want to do it, but we need to work with upstream to get rid of that limitation first. And the same for running KEDA highly available. So you can do it somewhat highly available, but there's only one active instance. So it's more in terms of faster recovery rather than highly available at the moment. And then we also want to help you scale better. Like it's an anti-pattern to create multiple scaled objects for one scale target. So we want to allow you to basically block that, or block creating HPA. So more of the operations and governance around that as well. And it's good to know the HTTP add-on from KEDA is not the same as the HTTP autoscaler for Azure Container Apps. So they have their own autoscaler there. So don't get confused. And then more things like we want to embrace OpenTelemetry, both for publishing our metrics, because we have Prometheus metrics. We also want to do that for OpenTelemetry, but also scale based on OpenTelemetry metrics. We want to give more control on the autoscaling rules, do predictive autoscaling, and we're also actively working with the environmental sustainability tag from the CNCF so that we can help you be better for the planet. Then in terms of external scalars, something I want to do is have a .NET template. So you can just do .NET new KEDA scalar, and it scaffolds the whole project, and you just have to implement the logic there. So yeah, that's mainly it. Now, in terms of cloud events, I just wanted to dive a bit more into this. So on the right, you can see that KEDA already can scale applications. You can already use Kubernetes events, but with KEDA's cloud event support, we will push events to the destination that you define. So that can be inside the cluster or that can be outside the cluster. And it will have support for multi-clusters out of the box, meaning if you receive an event, you'll know it comes from cluster A and not cluster B. So if you manage multiple clusters, it's usable, let's say. So some ideas of the things we want to support is just CRUD operations, pausing autoscaling, scaling out and in from and to 0. But also, yeah, if your authentication is failing, today you have to wait until it blows up. Maybe you're using our Prometheus metric or you check the logs, but in this case, you'll actively be able to actively subscribe to that event and create a ticket, for example, so that somebody can look into it. So we really want to make it, we want to open KEDA up to end users and platform builders to extend. And then HTTP-based autoscaling. HTTP-based autoscaling is not a trivial thing, because if you want to scale down to 0, somebody needs to intercept the requests and hold them until your application is up. So that's why we have this separate add-on in beta. It does not depend on Prometheus. So that's a good thing, in my opinion. You're not forced to run it. And we're planning to integrate with all these traffic types as well. So this is a bit more in detail how it works. So there'll be some infrastructure for the KEDA HTTP add-on next to KEDA core, which is in green, and then you'll have your application. You can try this today if you want. It is just not supported for production workloads. And of course, you turn on application auto-scaling without scaling the cluster, and everything is fine. Please never do this, because scaling in Kubernetes is a multi-layer thing, where you can use KEDA to scale your application across nodes, but eventually you'll run out of capacity. So that's why you need cluster autoscaler or Carpenter to rebalance your workloads and basically scale out on the nodes. And if your auto-scaling for the cluster can't keep up, there's still virtual node and in Azure, there's still virtual kubelet and in Azure virtual nodes that can help you with overflowing this. And this is where scale to 0 is really nice, because it will free up a lot of capacity, and you will be able to get rid of a lot of compute that you don't need. So don't just use KEDA, think about all the aspects. And yeah, with that, I would like to open up for Q&A if there are any questions. So let me check.
I think we had one question about HTTP, listener, but you sort of answered that with your cool slides, so that was good. Yeah, I've been using KEDA since before it went GA, since version 1, and to see its journey has been awesome. It's part of my baseline now for pretty much all of my clusters, because it works so good.
Thank
and
you.
It's good to see that you've now integrated the likes of workload identity and that before workload identity is even officially out. So that's cool to see.
Yes, well, we found that new one is too major to wait, because managed identity is important. Pod identity is deprecated, I think, even. Yep. So, I mean, it's just a matter of time. So why wait? Let's just get to it and embrace it. I think it's a nice improvement there. Yeah.
Definitely.
And thank you for using KEDA as well.
No worries. The company I currently work for is on your list, and the old company I work for is on your list, so it's good to see them. I got a question, and it's about GitOps. And does KEDA support GitOps?
I'm not an expert in GitOps, but from what I understood, GitOps just allows you to check in all your manifests in a Git repo, which then get applied. Is that a good summary?
Yeah.
So in theory, if you have your triggered authentication and scaled object, it should work. The only problem would be installing KEDA itself.
Yeah, but with the AKS add-on, then that's nice and easy. Yeah. That's cool, because you can only install KEDA through the operator hub or through Helm charts. There isn't a manifest file, or is there a manifest file?
No. Once we create an official release on the GitHub release, actually, there's also a raw manifest. So if you want to use that, you can also go there and use that.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good. Cool. Just checking if there's any other questions on any of the other stream places, but I can't see any. So yeah.
So either I did a good job, or everybody just ran away and got bored. I think
I'm sure. I'm sure it's probably you did a good job.
Yeah. I don't know.
But if they do have any questions, if they're watching it, because obviously it's going to be on YouTube after the fact of the live stream, if they do have any questions, where can they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me on Twitter at Tom Kerkhove, same handle on GitHub. We're also in the Kubernetes Slack. It's just called KEDA. But we always suggest people to just go to github.com/KEDA and open a GitHub discussion. And then we're happy to help you and either create a bug based on that. But that way, everything's consolidated and people can find common questions.
Cool. So you use discussions rather than issues to start off with, yeah?
Yes, because an issue is, for me, it's a backlog and not really a question. And then you can create an issue based on that if it's needed.
Awesome, that's good. And if people want to learn more about KEDA, is it just best to go to the website, or
you can go to the website. There's some videos there. You can also go to our organization to see the samples. And I think your LinkedIn learning course also discusses KEDA, does it?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned KEDA in there, but yeah, so that's good. And
in the end, it's fairly simple, so there's not that much to learn, which is good, I guess. But yeah, we don't have that many resources other than a few samples and some presentations.
Cool. And then for me, is it KEDA or is it KEDA? Or how do you actually say it?
It depends who you ask. I say KEDA.
Cool. And that's how I'm going to say it from now on.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome. Right. So yeah, thanks very much, Tom. It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
See you, everyone.
Bye.